right, it's the Brett Allan Show. We are live at Galacticon in Denver, Colorado, at the Denver Marriott Tech Center. So thanks to those guys. I have to say, this is like the first time that since we've been podcasting, my little boy is out there drinking his soda. He'll be hyped up later. Since we've
one
been
of three of our audience.
one of three of our
Four
audience.
of our audience.
But thanks for everybody that's watching and supporting us. I have to say, since we started podcasting, this is the first live show that we've ever done. So it's exciting. It's a little bit different, but my guest is a good friend I just met probably a few months.
I think that's funny. You're like, he's a good friend, and then you like pick up your phone like you have to read my name.
How do you say your last name? No, Dan Bublitz Jr. He's a comic. We met. I'll have to say he does stand-up comedy all over Denver and all over the country, really. But
It's true.
you host shows in Loveland.
That's correct.
And at the local breweries and some of the bars and one of the pizza places, which is really cool. And that's how we got connected. Is I came to one of his shows and we've become good friends. So, Dan, thank you for hanging out today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I could tell.
What if I just gave like short answers, like every question?
Yeah, like
I'm
yes,
just like,
yes, no, no.
Sure. Yep.
Okay, so as I said, this
The
is
worst podcast guest ever.
I know. You're totally fine. So we have done everything virtually since the beginning, and so this is our first chance to talk to people in person. So I honestly,
congratulations. That's awesome.
all joking aside, I'm excited to have you and to chat with you a little bit. So you do stand-up comedy. You've been a comic for a long time. I was just going through your bio, just looking at some things here. You've performed in a lot of different places. I don't necessarily like to ask like how you got started in comedy, but mostly I kind of am interested in the fact of like what was it about comedy that like interested you? Like how did that draw begin?
Well, I mean, I was always interested in comedy. I think, like, you know, one of the things you kind of realize as you get older, I use comedy as a way to deflect, like, bullies and stuff. Like, that was my defense mechanism because, you know, people would try to, like, make fun of me or pick on me. And then I would just, like, you take the power away by, like, doing self-deprecating humor.
Okay.
So I'd, like, make fun of myself. And then suddenly, you know, these people who were trying to bully me couldn't really bully me anymore. I had the power, essentially. So that was part of it. And I've always just been, you know, I was more interested in sketch comedy than I was stand-up.
Okay.
I was a big fan of Kids in the Hall, Saturday Night Live, you know, all the different kinds of sketch shows. In Living Color was probably my favorite sketch show.
Okay.
So I was always, like, interested in comedy. Even before I got into comedy, you know, I was a big fan of, like, shows like Last Comic Standing and things like that. And you know, watching like Premium Blend on Comedy Central. So it's always been kind of there. But ultimately, I just kind of a chicken, I guess. I just didn't. I took a long time because I had to get over stage fright to do comedy, and the accelerator ended up being the short. The short version is I got divorced. That's how I started comedy. So because I started comedy way late in life. I was 31 when I started.
That's interesting, but I think like even then to now you've had like very measurable success. I feel like, and I've said this to you before, as far as like the things that you've done, like you've done dry bar comedy, you've done Kill Tony, and for those who don't know who are watching or listening don't know what Kill Tony is, can you explain it? I was gonna try and explain it, but you would probably do much better at explaining it than I probably would.
Yeah, well, it's become a lot more famous now than it was when I did it. But it's just a podcast where amateur comedians essentially sign up like you would for an open mic, and then they have a bucket. They put your name in a bucket, and then they draw names out of the bucket. Then you have to go up, do a minute of comedy, and the object is to kill Tony, hence the title. Tony Hinchcliffe is the host. He brings a panel of celebrity comics on, and they basically just roast you when you're terrible. That's a lot of what it is. It's a lot of comics getting up there and then just totally having their hopes and dreams shattered by these celebrity comedians.
I think that's anything in the entertainment industry is you could totally have your dreams shattered. Well, I was interviewing a comedian, Mark Norman, who's another comic, and he said that people go to him often and ask him for advice, and he has always said, like, in the amount of time that you've asked me and solicited me for advice, all I'm going to do is probably just crush like every hope and dream that you have, and to just write jokes and perform. So I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit, but you've done some big things, and you've performed, you headline mostly. You do some featuring. He's going to be at the Comedy Fort on Sunday, actually, doing a set for their industry show. But I want to ask you. You said something interesting about, having these moments of time where you get up there and perform, and you either do really good or really bad. For you, where was the moment where you knew that you could handle the, I don't want to say failure, but like,
Well, it is failure. That's what it
where,
was.
where you knew that you could get past the bombing part, where you didn't get up and kill, maybe you thought you would, but you knew that you could keep going?
Well, for me, honestly, that moment, I mean, there was a moment where I did a corporate show, and this is what inspired my podcast, is that I did a corporate show. It went horrible. I bombed for like an hour, and then after I listened back to the video, the audio, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, but it was still pretty bad, and that's what inspired me to create my podcast, which is called The Art of Bombing.
Okay.
Where I come from, I look at comedy from a reverse, perspective, where it's like, oh, let's look at failure. How can we learn from those failures to get better at comedy? And for me, what really made dealing with those bad shows a lot easier was realizing, by talking to other comedians, that every comedian bombs at every level of their career. There's just gonna be a night where you can have an off night and not do well, and every comic goes through that. So, the more I talked to comedians and realized that, I was like, oh, this is part of being a comedian. And if you don't bomb, you're probably not a very good comedian, because you're not going to learn from, your mistakes, and you're not going to get better at the craft.
Now, I've watched you and your crew perform at a lot of these local shows in Loveland, different varying sizes of audiences and crowds. But the thing that I've noticed is that is consistent is the fact that, like, you just have to keep the show going, right? No matter what
Oh, absolutely.
people are laughing or not.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's because you got to do your time. In our industry, if you're scheduled or if you're booked to do X amount of time, you need to fulfill that time. I mean, that essentially it's a contract. You've agreed for, to get some money for that amount of time, and to fulfill your end of the deal, you got to push through that. And I can tell you this much: when you're bombing, and it feels like an eternity on stage. Like 3 minutes feels like an eternity.
Well, even when you get
but
up
when
to
you're
perform.
crushing, it's the opposite. It goes so fast. When you're doing really well and having a good time, you're just like, whoa, I'm already out of time. I'm done. This is wild. But it's two different sides there.
Yeah, I mean,
different.
I can imagine, like, if you're doing really well and the crowd's really into it, like an hour set can just probably seem like nothing.
Oh,
But then,
absolutely.
like,
It
if
goes
you're
really
getting up
fast.
there and you're telling jokes and people aren't laughing and are like fidgeting with their phones or whatever. So when you're
And that can be very distracting for sure.
or
One
if you're
thing
in a
I
comedy
found,
club where they're like, you have to use a QR code to order your food
Yeah.
or something.
Well, and that's one of those. That's a situation where, and I don't know. I mean, I imagine they tell the comics that people are going to be on their phones ordering, but I would hope they would, because if you don't know that, you're going to get very discouraged. And then I've seen comics that didn't know that they were using their phones to order get kind of upset. They're like, "Why are you on your phone?" And they're like, "Well, we're just trying to order drinks." And they're like, "Oh, my bad," But then it makes that
I have that
awkward
experience
moment in the show.
It's like, what's going on over here? And it like turns into a crowd work moment. But then it's like, oh, I'm just ordering
I'm just trying to support the club.
a Roy Rogers. That's interesting. So you've had what I said earlier is what I would consider to be measurable success as a comic. And you have good moments, you have bad moments, you have success, and you have failure. But what keeps you going? Like, what motivates you to keep getting up on stage and telling jokes and working? And we'll get to your podcast, so I want to talk about that. But what keeps you going? Like, how do you stay motivated as a comic and not just
Massicism? No, I mean, for me, it's just I don't know. Because the thing with comedy, there's always something more you can do. It seems like
Okay.
it's like one of them. You're chasing this dream that there's never enough. You know, like you hit a certain level of success, and then it's like, well, what's the next thing I can do? And it's like constantly, and to compare it to like playing a video game, you're conquering levels, and then you
Yeah.
go to the next level, and you want to try to beat that level. And then then you beat the boss at that level, and you want to go to the next level, and you're trying to defeat the game. But in comedy, the game is never really ending. I mean, you look at some of these comedians, like Louis Black just announced that he's going on his last tour,
Yeah.
right? And he's still going to do like writing and probably his podcast and stuff like that. But he's doing his last live tour. He's 75,
Wow.
and he's doing his last tour. Like that's like it. He's had all kinds of success, comedy specials, Netflix specials, whatever, and he's still going and going and going. And at being 75, I would hope that I've done well enough where I could just retire and enjoy.
Yeah.
a little
No.
bit of
No.
life,
I
but,
totally.
but
Yeah.
that's comedy. Like you either keep going or you quit altogether and go do something else. it seems
There's
like.
no plan B necessarily.
Oh no, never.
Because I think when you want to do something creative, you want to do something that's not a normal 8 to 5. Like if you have a plan B, do you think that can hold you back sometimes? Maybe.
I mean, maybe. I mean, because with comedy, you do have to like really you have to make the commitment. You're either kind of a hobby comic, and there's nothing wrong with being a hobby comic. I think in today's industry too, because unless you're a big name and a big draw, there's not a lot of money getting tossed around to comics at unknown comics. So you almost have to have other gigs to help make money or whatever. But even some of the bigger comics, they have to have all these different revenue streams.
Right.
Advertising from podcasting, doing TV shows, doing whatever to make the living. You can there's very few comedians that are making just a straight up living doing just nothing but stand up. There's always these other revenue streams coming in. But I think you have to have something there to kind of help support you. Along
Yeah,
the
for
way.
sure.
Because otherwise, and I've known comics who have like decided to go all in, and it didn't work out. Like they, pretty much homeless. Like when I lived in San Diego, like before I moved back to the Midwest, I had like 3 or 4 comics living in my 2-bedroom apartment,
God.
plus a roommate and his girlfriend. There was like 6 of us. Like I had like friends that like slept on the floor in my bedroom, and then I had a couple other friends that slept in the living room on the floor. Like it was wild. And that's how dedicated they were to like, oh, I got to go out every night and do comedy. I got to try to make it. And I've heard plenty of other stories like that, like where comics will do that. They'll move to LA or New York and pretty much just be homeless to try to like chase the dream.
Or start a podcast and have the vision of making lots of money. But I think what you do is so fascinating, and I've said this to you before, just like in general conversation, in the fact that like, your job, actors, it's not like what I would do for an 8 to 5 because it's so different. How often do you find yourself writing and working on new jokes?
Not nearly enough. But I mean, I say that kind of jokingly, but also kind of true. Like sometimes it doesn't feel like enough because I don't like sit down and take dedicated time to writing material, but at the same time, I'm always thinking about comedy. Like if I'm driving somewhere, I'm probably not paying attention to driving as much as I should, and I'm tuning out thinking about how can I make this joke better? How can I, oh, this is a funny idea. How do I, turn this into a joke and get it worked out? And, so like I'm always thinking about comedy, but I don't like sit down and just take a dedicated amount of time like every day. I'm going to do 10 minutes of writing. I just, kind of go with the flow. And I do more like, I think of more of like premises and then try to work it out on stage. Like I don't hardly ever physically write any material. Like it's all in my head. And even when I'm getting ready for a performance, I might write a set list out just to kind of get an idea. But that's just kind of like my, outline. I'm not necessarily going to go in that order. I'm not necessarily going to do all those jokes. I kind of let the energy of the crowd kind of determine, kind of where I'm going. I know I'm going to start at point A and I'm going to end at point B, and everything in between, in the middle, whatever happens, kind of.
I think that's so fascinating. So that's how you work out new material, is you're writing things down. as you think about them, you have premises that
Well,
you're
in my head, I'm not
in your
actually.
head.
I'm not actually writing them down, and that might be the problem. Maybe if I did actually
Well, I've
write them
seen
down, I
some
would remember
comics like
them.
go up with notebooks. I see them go up with set lists, and or some just go up and start talking about a concept or a premise,
Hmm.
and then if people are laughing or, as you said, the energy is ebbing and flowing in the crowd, then they go, okay, maybe take a mental note and go, okay, this is going to work. And then you just sort of. So, how long does it take you from start to finish to work on like a tight 5 or a 10-minute set? Like, what is your process for that?
I don't know. I mean, it could take years. Like a lot of newer comics too. Like because depends on. I feel like it depends on where you're at in your career. Because like newer comics that are maybe 1 to 2 years in, it's going to take them a lot longer because they're also trying more new things, but not everything's going to hit and evolve. For me now, I mean, to get a new 5 to 10 minutes, I mean, it could take a year, couple years. It just really depends on how much I'm putting into the writing and trying to think of new material.
Okay.
But once I have some premises, it does not take me very long to get it shaped and formatted. As an example, I've got a new. It's probably 5 to 10 minute worth of stuff that I'm really working on about being raised by young parents. I'm talking about my pets. I have a whole chunk about cats and dogs and stuff like material like that I've been talking about for the last I don't know 4 or 5 months, something like that, maybe not even, and that's been coming together really quickly. Because I think like I said, it has to do where you're at in your career. The more experience you have, the more lessons you've learned, you're able to take that, the tools in your tool belt and use them for your when you're writing your material, so it goes a little bit faster. Like I'm more comfortable, like I said, thinking of an idea and then just taking it to the stage and working it out. Like not even I'll work it out in my head, kind of get an idea how I think I want to say it, and then I say it out loud, see how it sounds. Because when I'm on stage, I'm actively listening. Like you want to like react to the crowd and everything, and you feed off their energy, they feed off your energy. But a lot of times, a comic is in their own head.
Okay.
Like I'm thinking about what's next, the next couple jokes, things like that, while I'm telling a joke. And then, as I'm telling jokes, like I know when I mess up. Like as soon as I mess up a joke, the audience might not know that I missed a beat, like I missed a line. I
Right.
still got to laugh. But in my head, I'm like, oh man, I totally messed up this joke. Like I screwed this up. And I know that instantly. They don't know. And then, so I'm always like actively paying attention and I'm there in my head while I'm on stage.
Well, again, as I said, and I've
I don't know
told
if that answered your
it
question.
does.
But
No, I think it's rather fascinating to think about what you do. I consider it definitely an art form or a craft, and a lot of people try it and are successful or not successful. I don't know what is the percentage of success rate when people start. If you were to just guess, like
oh, I have no. There's so many comics. Like it's very. I mean, the percentage would be pretty low, I think, because there's so many people that decide that they want to do comedy. Like it's
well,
wild
they
how many
watch you and go,
comedians.
"Oh, I can do that," and then they get up and try it and go,
Well, that usually ends poorly because they don't have a plan. You know what I mean? Like because I've seen that happen where people will come to an open mic as an audience member and think, "Oh, I can do better than this," and then they sign up and then they get
the fear
humbled,
hits.
and then no, they get humbled because they don't. They think a lot of people think that they can just go up and talk about whatever and it's going to be funny, and they end up telling the "you had to be there" kind of jokes. Like they're talking about stuff that would be funny to their friends, but
Like if
these
it's
people don't
if
know
it's,
you. They're
if
not
it's
your
people
friends.
that you know and you're hanging out, like people tell me I'm funny, like just as a sense of humor kind of thing, but I can't see myself getting up there and doing a 5 minute bit. I see I'm even having a hard time getting it out now about our drive and the ice on the windows. Like that's probably funny, and you could probably write a joke about our drive up here, but like
Oh yeah, I could definitely write a joke about driving with this guy that's lived in California for the last 10 years. Has no idea about snow.
right. So uh,
thought his window was full of ice when it was really just dirt from
yeah,
the
see,
road.
now he's roasting
See?
me. Yeah, see, that's
It's like,
definitely
why isn't this melting?
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, what you do is so different. Well, I want to talk about your podcast, um, The Art of Bombing. You've had some really cool people on the show, and you talk about stories in their career, about bombing and their experiences, learning from it, and how it makes them a better person. Can you let our listeners and viewers who are going to watch this later, or people who are here now, talk about like your show? Like, what's it really about? Like,
Yeah,
what?
I mean, essentially that's what it is. It's about bombing stories. That's the first and foremost thing. Like the concept is that every comedian has a bad night, and so what I do is I have my guests come on, and they tell a story of a time where they had a really bad show or they bombed, and then we talk about the circumstances that led to that. You know, because a lot of times there's different things that can cause a comedian to bomb. It's not necessarily just them having a bad night. Sometimes it's situational. You know, there's environmental factors. You know, if you're doing comedy, for instance, like at a hotel, like in a ballroom like this, sometimes shows like that aren't good because they're not set up for comedy shows. They don't have
Right.
good lighting. They don't have good stages. They don't have the right seating. You know, there's things like that. And a lot of times shows like that are like corporate events too. And that's the other thing. It's like, oh, we're doing a holiday party at a hotel. Let's have a comedian come in. And well, a lot of the people at the holiday party are only there. They want their gifts and their free food. They don't care about entertainment. Per
Right.
se, you
You're
know?
sort of an afterthought, really.
So there's a lot of like environmental things that can play into a comedian bombing, and so then we talk about things like that and kind of analyze their set, and then they talk about what they learned from that time, because then the idea is that other comics that will listen to the podcast and that they'll gain some of this knowledge, and then hopefully they can avoid the mistakes that we've made along the way, and you know, the shows that things that caused our shows to go bad. And then on the other hand, it's like, you know, for people who are big comedy fans that want a little inside look on the behind the scenes of that kind of thing. Because
Okay.
a lot of times the stories are pretty funny, they're pretty entertaining because the comics are telling them themselves, you know, and because comics are funny people and they write jokes, it's, you know, they're making it funnier when they're telling the story, you know, and they're making it entertaining because they're good at storytelling, and so it becomes just a fun little listen, you know. And then, yeah. So, I mean, that's the premise of it. It's basically shows don't always go the way they should, and we talk about it.
Yeah. What are some of the lessons you've learned from some of the
Oh,
comics
man,
you've had?
I've learned so much. I mean, honestly, I started getting better as a comedian after I started doing my podcast just
Wow.
because of that. You know, like I said, the biggest lesson I learned is that, you know, at the time when I started it, you know, I go back to that show I was talking about where I bombed and that corporate show, I was ready to quit comedy. Like
Oh,
I had
wow.
like on the way home after that show, I had to phone a friend, another comedian, and I was like, I'm done. Like I was basically having a panic attack at how bad it was. And you know, my friend Nathan Holtz, a fantastic comic from South Dakota, good friend of mine, he was like, just calm down, go to bed. Tomorrow's a new day. It'll be fine. It's not as bad as you think it is. You know, like, and it was a good pep talk. But then after that, I was like, you know, I want to work on. Sorry, I forgot to silence my phone. And you would think that I had a. I'd
Of
see.
all
I know.
people.
And while we're talking about recording podcasts, it's my phone that goes off.
That's all
too.
right.
There, it's silenced now. Sorry about that. But yeah, like I started talking to other comics and realized that I wasn't the only one. Because at the time, I felt like I was the only comic bombing. Like I was a terrible
Okay.
comedian. And then I started talking to these other comics, and they were sharing their stories. And then I realized everybody's doing it. So that was the most valuable lesson, is to learn that I'm not alone. And the second lesson I feel like I learned from it is that if you're not bombing, you're probably not getting better, because you can do good and keep doing good, but you're not going to learn. You don't learn as much from the good shows as you do from the bad shows. Because if a good show goes good, you're not going to take much of it. But if you do bad, you're going to, you know, really go in and try to analyze that to see, you know, you could have been doing good for the first 10 minutes, and then suddenly you said something that the audience didn't like, you know, like you start talking about a taboo subject, you know. One
Mm.
subject I find that can be very tricky with audiences is when you start talking about religion. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter what kind of religion, but if you start talking about religion, that can be, you know, that can you can cut your audience off, and they'll react in a different way, and then you can derail your whole set. Things like that. So
Interesting.
and it also taught me, to do that, to analyze that, to like go
Okay.
back and look, try to figure out, try to pinpoint where things went wrong on the set. And sometimes you're not going to figure it out because sometimes an audience judges you before you even start talking. As you're walking out on stage, they see you and they decide, I don't like this guy's shirt. He looks whatever. I don't like his glasses. And they decide that they already don't like you.
Right.
And then there's nothing you're going to do to win them over. They've made that decision before you even said anything.
Wow. Then I've heard other comedians say that too, where they lose the room instantly. Like they have I don't remember who said it, Nate Bargatze maybe, or one of these guys. It's like you have point so many seconds from the time you
Oh, absolutely.
Get going to start telling your first joke to win the room over, or it's going to be tough. Well, I think that's very cool. The podcast is great. You've been performing a lot lately in Loveland, and you've got shows coming up this month. Where are you performing at in December?
In December? Well, in December, I'm going all over. I'm all over the place. In December, obviously, we have some of our local shows. You can follow, if you just people locally, if you look up Loco Comedy, you can find all our local shows, but we'll have shows at Loveland Ale Works. We have our monthly open mic that we host at Slice and Roll. We got a show at Sky Bear Brewing, Verboten Brewing. Those are all local to Loveland. And then as far as my own schedule, I'm going to be in Kansas City on December 8th. On December 9th, I'll be in St. Louis. December 10th, I'll be in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is just outside of Nashville. And then from December 11th through the 16th, I'm going to be in Bristol, Tennessee at the Blue Ridge Comedy Festival. So I'll be, doing this festival. It's kind of a contest, too. So
Okay.
Hopefully I can bring all the funny and advance and make it worth the trip. Either way, I'll still have a good time. I'll get to network with some other comics and stuff like that, so that'll be good. And then I have a big holiday show in December in Loveland at Big Beaver Brewing.
Very cool. Well, one last question as we wrap here. I know we have a whole hour, but my shows usually last 10 or 15 minutes. So one last question. So
we recorded for a half hour and you're going to edit it down to 10 minutes? Is that
well,
what you
no.
just said?
Yeah, it's just going to be sound
You're
bites.
very ambitious because I don't do that much editing on my podcast.
No, I don't really either. So my last question, and I ask every single guest this, out of the trajectory of your career as a comic, what is one thing that you have learned about yourself, either for the better or for the worse, that has challenged you to grow to become a better person? Just whether it's
that's a deep question.
Inside or outside of comedy.
Wow, that's deep. I think for me it's persistence. That's
Okay.
one thing that I've learned is that I'm very persistent. I don't give up easily. I will fail and I will fail and I will fail and I will fail again, and then I'll get up and I'll fail again. And then I'll keep failing even when I don't succeed. And then, I'll just take the beating. And get to that point where I should quit, but I don't.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's easy to quit when we don't see success right away.
Oh, absolutely. And it's easy to, when you're looking at success, like one of the things, especially with, I feel like all entertainment, you have to be careful on, watching your peers. Because a lot of times, especially in comedy, you'll see friends or other comics who maybe you're not friends with, but other comics who you don't think are at your level get things that you think you deserve.
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
easy to get bitter about it and, have a negative mindset about it, and all that's going to do is handicap you as a performer, because instead of thinking about your career, you're worried about everybody else's, and it's definitely
Dangerous.
it's very dangerous. And it's the way I always look at it, and this is probably why I'm so persistent. Despite anytime I fail or whatever, is that I truly believe in comedy, at least comedy, maybe all entertainment. There's enough for everybody. There's enough pie for everybody. Somebody else's success isn't blocking me from my success.
Right.
The one thing that they got isn't going to stop me from getting another thing. You got to worry about, yourself, and that's another thing that's beautiful about comedy is that while we're all kind of on the same direction, we're all trying to go after the same things, and I think with comedy now the big grand whole thing is getting that Netflix special or
Yeah.
HBO special or something like that,
Right.
or a TV series, whatever it is. You don't have to go by the same path. Like everybody has their own path that can lead them to their success. There's no way to like copy. Sure, there are things that you will do in your career that can help propel you, and there are things that you can do that will hinder you, but you're ultimately on your own path, and you're the one that's going to be ultimately your own worst enemy and your own hindrance. Like other comics aren't going to be the ones sabotaging you. You're going to
No.
sabotage yourself because you're concentrated on what those other people are doing, and you just got to like stay focused on your own career and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, I find that to be the same thing for podcasting. Like doing this here, I consider this measurable success for you, for me, for the people that put it on. Like to be able to come out here and do a broadcast, I think is a big deal. I know there's 100 other podcasters that would be like, "Oh, I want to do that." How do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
I get direct messages a lot from people asking, well, how do you book celebrities, or how do you do this and do that? And honestly, the answer I always tell people is like, you just have to be consistent and be kind. And I think if you can do those two things, you will see doors start to open. I mean,
Oh,
there's
absolutely. And I
obviously
think-
making connections is a big deal too.
Yeah, it definitely is, but being kind is huge. That's one
Yeah.
thing when people ask me about, if they ask me for comedy advice, my biggest thing that I always try to like really leave with comics is to be nice. You got to be nice to everybody. Even if there's somebody you don't like, and you don't have to necessarily kiss their butt, but just be nice to them. Be nice to everybody, because you don't know who's going to do what tomorrow. And a lot of comedians, like they'll end up going, maybe they don't do stand up, but they still go somewhere in the industry. And if you're a total jerk to somebody tomorrow, they may be, ahead of a comedy network, and now you're never getting that special or whatever it is, because
a talent booker at a club.
Yeah, that's a good example. A talent booker at a club, and things like that can definitely happen. So it's like, just, be nice to everybody. Be kind, just be nice, and that alone will help propel a career.
Yeah, the other thing I've learned too is you don't necessarily want to go in with an angle necessarily either, because people can sniff that out and realize there's a motive,
Oh, absolutely.
Like I told
You gotta
Dan.
be genuine, kind of genuine.
Yeah, I told Dan, like when we first hung out, like, well, he has a co-producer, Jeffrey Albright, who also works equally hard, puts on these shows. And he said something to me, interestingly enough. He goes, most people that want to hang out with us want to like figure out how to be a comic or look for ways to do time. And I said, well, none of that is interesting to me. But what you do is interesting and fascinating, but I just want to be friends with people. Well, that's so cool, man. I think what you do is awesome, and I've seen you perform several times. What's your website where people can come check out?
They can come check out danbublitz.com. It's that simple. And it's spelled Bublitz. If you spell it the fun way, I don't know where you'll end up. So that's on you.
Yeah, don't Google that.
Be careful how you type that in, because that could lead to someplace you don't want to be. And that'll ruin your algorithm forever. And then on all social media.
Or it could help you.
Maybe it
depending
could
on
help
who
you.
are.
It really could.
But you don't do that kind of stuff anymore. So
No, exactly. I got out of that career. Like I said, I made
that was only
that
during
career
COVID.
switch.
His OnlyFans shut down.
No, it was only Dan's.
Only Dan's. Okay.
And then
can
all my other social media is just Debub Comedy on all the platforms.
Yes, and if you somehow see this and hear this, and you need a comedian for an event, or hit him up.
Yep, absolutely. I do all kinds of bookings, corporates.
Bar mitzvahs,
I don't know about that.
baptisms.
I don't know if I'm the guy for kids comedy.
Birthday parties. No,
I gave up clowning a long time ago.
Okay. All right, very cool. Well, thanks everybody. Head over to brettallenshow.com. Check out all the amazing guests we've had. Some of them are here at the convention. We've interviewed a couple of these people on our show over the years. That's where you can connect with us on social media. And we put out episodes almost daily, audio and video. Head over to YouTube, look up The Brett Allan Show. Like and subscribe, please. It helps us out. I think that's it. Well, this has been really cool, Dan. Again, we've hung out a lot, but this is, I think, the first like real deep conversation that we've been able to have and kind of
You
get
gotta
to
pick my brain about
pick your brain about comedy.
comedy.
And very cool. Thanks everybody that's in the room here. Again, this is really cool. This is our first, as I said at the beginning, live in-person conversation we've done.
First of many.
First of many, hopefully, and hopefully we'll get
Gonna
some
put
good
that good
interviews
energy
today.
out there.
And thanks everybody for watching and listening. Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.